What's up? This is Dr. Taylor Krick with the Autoimmune Doc podcast, and there's another study review. So I like reviewing studies. I got a ton of studies on my desktop or on my computer. So I like just reviewing them on video and trying to keep it short. Today's is really great. I love it. A lot of them have to do with autoimmunity. Some of them have to do with topics that are slightly related to autoimmunity. This paper is about mental disease, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, so on and so forth. But it's talking about gluten and bread, so certainly related to an autoimmune conversation. And the title is Bread and Other Edible Agents of Mental Disease. So I love that name. It's published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience as a review from about 5 years ago, 4.5, 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. But still really good, came out of Italy. So I'm going to focus mostly on the abstract, which is just kind of the synopsis at the beginning. Then I'll scroll through, just show you some of the highlights. As always, if you'd like this full text, I'll send it to you. This is available. It's open access, so you can find this one. But yeah, super cool. So it says, perhaps because gastroenterology, immunology, toxicology, and nutrition and agricultural sciences are outside of their competence and responsibility, psychologists and psychiatrists typically fail to appreciate the impact that food can have on their patient's condition. So that alone is pretty major. Anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. Again, the first place that they go is to these mental health practitioners. And the first thing that they're looking at is, do you need Ativan? Do you need Prozac? Do you need Wellbutrin? Do you need Paxil? When they might look at, okay, what's going in your mouth? And that might have an impact. So that alone is very, very rare for a mental health professional, let alone like a clinical counselor or, somebody like that. Here, we attempt to correct this situation by reviewing in non-technical plain English. So this is written for lay people, how cereal grains, the world's most abundant food source, can affect human behavior and mental health. We present the implications for the psychological sciences of the findings that in all of us, this is crucial, in all of us, bread makes the gut more permeable and thus can encourage the migration of food particles to sites where they are not expected, prompting the immune system to attack both the particles, so a gluten sensitivity, an IgG antibody sensitivity, and brain-relevant substances that resemble them, like myelin basic protein or cerebellar peptide, or just cross reactivity, certain self-tissues that resemble food proteins in their just genetic makeup and their molecular mimicry, it's called. They kind of resemble each other's. And that breads also release opioid-like compounds that are capable of causing mental derangement if they make it to the brain. A grain-free diet, although difficult to maintain, especially those that need it the most, could improve the mental health of many and be a complete cure for others. So again, before I go through the rest of this paper, that's kind of the highlight right there. The abstract really sums it up, but again, a grain-free diet, something that's talked about constantly in a functional medicine office. Whether somebody has known autoimmune disease or not, what if they have anxiety? What if they have depression? And that's what this paper goes into. So in the intro, it goes into the history of, how grains came to be and how humans and grains, co-evolved, and how we've been using them for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. That's not my focus here. They talk about the difference between grasses and grains, and then also poisons. It says plants produce poisons. Plants make their own poisons, like lectins and different things like that. It says plants have engineered a wide variety of poisons. Over 50,000 of them have been identified so far. And so it says the self-defense proteins are made for this purpose, to scare off, predators and things like that. And then it talks about gluten. It says gluten has proven to be toxic for a proportion of people in the last few decades that has been constantly rising. And it says, indeed, the wheat varieties that are basically the most detrimental have become the most common. And this is particularly worrying given that gluten is not only naturally present in bread, cake, pasta, pizza, beer, but it is also used as an additive to a bunch of other stuff. It says a survey of Australian supermarkets found gluten in 2,000 different food items, ranging from sauces to processed meats, and over 100 non-food items like shampoos and pain relievers. So that's wild in and of itself. So then it talks about leaky gut, holes in the gut. It says a study done, in the 50s found that 82 schizophrenic patients after they died had inflamed guts. 50% of them had stomach inflammation, and 90% of them had intestinal inflammation. And they said that that's the association between the gut and the brain has been noticed for at least 2,000 years and has been long been confirmed. An unhealthy gut may open up our body to harmful bacteria, toxins, and undigested pieces of food. It's basically saying an intestinal wall that's one cell thick, that's very, very wide and expansive, is what separates us from the outside world. And when that barrier gets breached, it can cause problems. And of course, on this channel, or if you follow my podcast, it's not the first time that you've ever heard of this. Goes on to talk about the gut, talk about the gut lining, talk about the gut lining. It is worth noting. Let's see. Abnormal gut permeability is associated with a wide range of diseases like arthritis, asthma, diabetes, and MS. It's worth noting that psychological stress worsens gut permeability. So that's just kind of an interesting fact there. Now, immune system mistakes. After increasing gut permeability, and with its help, gluten can make trouble if it happens to cross that outer lining. And then it talks about wheat sensitivity. So in 1 out of 100 people, this hypersensitivity is expressed as celiac disease. That's not that common. This even talks about how most people with celiac do not know that they have it. In a study of over 5,000 students, the diagnosed to undiagnosed were outnumbered 1 to 6, meaning that for every one person that knew they had celiac, there were 6 people that had it and didn't know it. That's very, very common. It also says that some people do better on a gluten-free diet and worsen upon a gluten challenge. And they don't meet the criteria for wheat allergy. They don't meet the criteria for celiac. So this is termed non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And they're just going through all of these things. Symptoms emerge. They're largely extra-intestinal. They include headache and eczema, but also fatigue and brain fog, and bloating and abdominal pain, and etc. So goes on to talk about wheat and the mind and some other things. It says antibodies against gluten will attack neurological tissues. They can cross-react with neurologic tissues like myelin basic protein and cerebellar proteins. They also attack an enzyme involved in the production of GABA, which is called GAD65, glutamic acid decarboxylase. It converts glutamic acid to GABA. GABA is our main calming neurotransmitter, and it says its GABA dysregulation is implicated in both anxiety and depression. So he's talking about just some of the science linking and some of the mechanisms linking these things. They also go into the gut microbiome and how important that is. And then the last thing they talk about are bread and other drugs. Gluten and dairy especially have compounds in them that mimic opioids, gluteomorphin, casomorphin. And because they mimic opioids, can mimic neurotransmitters and kind of have an effect on the brain. So that's another mechanism by which these things can have an effect on the brain. Now, that's it. But this is really, 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 really interesting. And again, diet as a cure, this is again very, very interesting. That I don't like the word cure, but if you have anxiety and depression, and if you're willing to try a medication that has a laundry list of side effects, a psychotropic drug, would you be willing to try this? And if you are a practitioner who's, looking for the best protocol or whatever treatment I want to say, but the best route for your patient with the least harm, why would you possibly think that a medication would be a good first choice as opposed to a dietary change? The chances are fine that the dietary change might not work, but it's a more conservative thing to try first. So again, I think this is just a really cool study and showing again gluten's association to things that maybe aren't autoimmune, but bread as an agent of mental disease. Cool stuff.